Welcome to Electrolysis Unplugged, an after-hours chat beyond the probe with Joannie and Stephanie. We're here to dive deep into the world of electrolysis, education, and all things hair removal.
Whether you're a seasoned professional or just curious about the art of permanent hair removal, we've got the insights, tips, and fun stories to keep you plugged in.
So grab your tools, take a seat, and let's get into it. This is Electrolysis Unplugged, brought to you by the Electrology Education Coalition.
Hello, everyone.
Good evening.
Good evening. What were we talking about just a second ago that we kind of wanted to kick off? Oh, research.
Rose. Huh?
Yeah, we'll talk about that. But no, we want to talk about research topics, remember?
Oh, yes. Okay. So we have a couple things to like housekeeping moments. So Saturday at 1 p.m. Pacific Standard Time, we are going to do an Instagram Live to go over some of the Q&A for June. Just so you guys know, if you're like, I have questions, and we'll go over the Q&A on there. If you want specific ones answered, send those in messages in chat or send them as questions on the platform. Research questions. So as you guys know, when we started E2C, one of the pillars that is like foundational for Joannie and myself is that we would like to see advancements in research when it comes to electrolysis. So with that being said, we have goals kind of to start setting in regards to what kind of information we would want to pull, what topics people really want covered, and just involvement in possible case studies in the future and that kind of stuff. And with you guys here, this is like where these conversations start happening. But the very first one is, if you could have your absolute favorite thing that is the question that gets asked every day in your practice, researched further because it's an unknown, or it's old school information. What do you want to see updated? What are you hoping to see in the future of electrolysis when it comes to that? So has anybody ever thought like, oh, I would love to see this kind of research done? And if so, unmute yourself, that's what I meant to say. And let's talk for a few minutes in regards to what that could look like. And start coming up with topics outside of what we want to see, that you guys also would love to see researched. It might not happen in a specific order. Some items might already have been researched and we might just have to ask the right people. But what is it that is like your burning question?
I can probably kind of start us off. And so, as you know, we're no longer on the FDA's website as 100% permanent. One of the reasons for that is actually because the research is outdated. And so since nothing's been really redone, it's kind of a normal thing that like these sorts of things just kind of cycle, you know? So in order for us to be able to get back up there as a field that is FDA approved, and I actually have like a screenshot of the FDA approval. But if you try to search for it online on the FDA's website, you won't find it anymore. And so I think that it would be important, honestly, to see about how that was given to begin with, and probably try to get us back up on FDA's website as 100% permanent, because you start there and then that gives us a lot of power in other fields. You know, when we're dealing with insurance companies and doctors that are saying electrolysis doesn't work or whatever it is, you know, clients not believing, whatever it is, that's going to be a big force to have behind us as a field.
And that was actually a great, so funny because I just saw Jenny pop up here, but like, that was actually a question that where we talked about this past weekend when we were in Canada, was that, for example, FDA approval means something here in the States, right?
But not everywhere, sure.
It doesn't mean it everywhere. And so what are those standards globally? What are people saying globally? And are they always leaning back on us as the gold standard for what it means to research permanency? I think that is a huge opportunity for us to bring electrology into the here and now, and see what that equivalency looks like to today's standards. Um, One of the things that Joanne and I talked about back when we first started talking about making E2C was doing case studies. And I know that that's a substantial thing that we would have to do to prove permanency. And it would have to be over a long process with variables in there. So there are items where it's like, going over, what modality you were using, what the person's medical background was, whether it's a blind study or whether it's a known study, who do we have to reach out to? So there's a lot to go into it. And it's been a continuous conversation on electrolysis information worldwide, where there's consumer spaces on that, because the consumers are now like, where's your FDA clearance? Why can they say that and you can't, right? And so that's just things that we've considered, not recently, but the last 4 years.
So I don't know if there's anybody else that's here right now today that kind of has an idea, something that might be future research or anything like that, but go ahead and chime in. You can, of course, always email if you think about it later. That's not a problem.
Well, I do.
Go
Yeah.
ahead, Eileen. Yeah.
I don't know if anybody else was on the EAI's CEU event on Sunday besides me, but they had 4 different electrologists give case studies, and there was no real scientificness is not the right word, but
Well, it's all about
no
the variables.
standardization. There was no
Yeah.
standardization.
Mhm.
And
Yep.
I mean, I'm not kudos to them for doing that.
Mhm.
But I feel like we need somebody to lay out how to do a case study, what is involved in having a case study. I personally would like to see evidence about why it hurts more on one side than it does on the other side, because you see that all the time. And I've
Mhm.
actually tried to research that, and I've seen some documentation in the scientific literature um, that the left side does tend to hurt more um, on some people. So they talked about that a little bit on, somebody mentioned that on Sunday as well. And so that's one thing. Another thing is I would love to see some sort of study done about us cleaning up after laser, um, the, especially the paradoxical hirsutism cases or
Mhm.
psychosis, whichever you want to call it. I'd like to see something like that. I'd also like to see familial studies done. Like,
Mm-hmm.
How
Yeah, I was
come
gonna.
I didn't get any hair, but my mom had it and my sister has it? But like, compared to the two of them at our ages, I got like one chin hair and I'm working 30 minutes a week or 30 minutes every other week on my sister. So,
One good thing too is, and I've started putting together a list of variable when I thought about the case study that I wanted to put together. This was years ago, so I still have like my document. And so I started thinking about all the different variables and entering into research to do case study is a lot of, I used to do research at university in neuroscience. So it was a lot of paperwork, a lot of charting of everything. It's pretty intense. But what's good is like the more variables we put in to be recorded, the more you can do with the data.
right.
So, like you can take full family histories and maybe
Mhm.
we don't use it for one study that we're extracting from, but
Exactly.
it's going to be for something else. And so, it's what would be cool to do maybe is like a research committee could come out from E2C, and those are actually interested in being part of the study as an electrologist, would join there, and we can just kind of start maybe discussing at least like the variables to get started. And then from there, like we have to make sure the electrologist is good too, because we
Mhm.
can't have bad insertions be a variable? Or I guess
Right,
we
right,
could.
right.
That could be a variable.
Could be.
Variable.
Yeah, what happens when, the insertion's not right? Well, there you go. So,
Right, right.
And like,
I was one of my new students. I had the kind of like a mic drop, jaw drop moment last week when I was talking to her, and I knew that she had been in the medical field, but I didn't know exactly what her situation was. And um, she was a resident neurosurgeon at
mhm,
Hopkins. Has done a lot of research. I
Mhm.
feel like I'm going to tread lightly, but I
Mm.
would like to draw her in,
mhm,
because I think she would be invaluable
yeah,
in that endeavor.
for sure.
Absolutely. Yeah, I mean, the way I look at this is we are such in like the initial stages of development that
Hmm.
the more that, and this is like really one of the big things that we thought about when it came to research is there's a lot of brains right here, right? And there's a
Hmm.
lot that each other can kind of play off of. When we were talking about in the chat, there's a questions about like the pain from one side to the other. We were talking about that. And when you said that earlier, Eileen, and it's interesting because this weekend when I was in Canada, one of their speakers was talking about pain management techniques and the synapse fatigue phenomena
Hmm.
and how it would take 10 hairs per second to get synapse fatigue to occur. Well, when I talked to Bono about it years ago, and Michael, he was incredibly intelligent when it came to electrolysis. And one of the things he said was that it's most likely your thermal relaxation time and the oscillation of the current that's creating that. However, if that's not it, what is that called? Right? What do we, if it's not that, because there is definitely, we all see it in our treatment rooms. What is that called then? How do we instruct on that? Because what's really cool in this chat right here, we have Eileen, myself, um, Anita, Joannie, and Jenny. We're all instructors. So we definitely see it when we're instructing, where people talk about all the time. And in the chat, Pauline and Angie, when you guys were like, I notice it when I'm left side to right side, left-handed technician, 100%. That's like something that we think about, right? I'm smooth sailing on my left side. I got to get myself into my best position on my right side. Otherwise, it's not going to feel as great because you're not as ideal on that space, right? But what does that actually look like? What are we saying when we say these pain thresholds? So I think that there is a lot that you can pull into kind of subset research spaces, which would be like pain management, PCOS, gender affirming care, areas that have been paradoxical hypertrichosis, different ethnicities, different not yeah, ethnicities, different types of familial backgrounds. So thinking about like, someone that had more hair because of where they're regionally from. All of that kind of gets played into this. And ultimately the FDA clearance, because those little light home-based units get to say they have FDA clearance too, but how? Like, what are they doing differently that we didn't do in recent years? I would love to see those FDA letters that they say they have whenever you
Hmm.
ask the comment section on the line. But like, you don't get answers. But I think that they're all really great topics.
So I think
So is it
probably
a money thing
Stephanie,
with the FDA, or is it actually research? What is it that I had no idea.
probably both,
Both.
honestly.
Yeah. I mean, it's an agency.
Yeah.
They're not doing it for no reason.
Right, right, right.
Yeah. Um, and like, what are the equivalent programs across the board? I mean, like, um, you're from Malaysia, right? So Malaysia and Canada, like, what are your equivalent agencies to FDA?
We
So
just we just use FDA here too because
Malaysia's like YOLO.
America will do all the work and we just ride on them. So
Okay.
a lot of things here they also claim FDA thing, and Malaysian AMA I can't remember what it stands for, but some medical agency. So they have a say on most aesthetic stuff. So they need clearance. So, and they're very stringent. So they need you to do all the research and give it to them, and then they will clear it and see whether it works or not and stuff like that. Yeah.
Gotcha. That's funny. So Jenny is saying Health Canada, we also use FDA clout. I mean, that's the thing is like, we have this unique space here in the States that because we've had so many agencies do so many things, and now I'm not saying that they're all legit spaces, but FDA does have a thing. You know, there is an importance to the CDA. I would like to figure out kind of like who our governing bodies that we work with the most are to like reach into those spaces too. I'm excited that you guys also think this is cool, right? Maybe. Yeah. Okay. Like, let's nerd out together.
So I
Uh,
think what we should do, Stephanie, with this topic is we probably can take this to, like I said, like a separate committee that
Mhm.
we can just kind of start talking about how we're going to approach it. So maybe like, especially with the case studies and coming up with all of our million of variables. And, you know, it also comes with those that are interested in joining, just knowing that it's not going to be a, you know, an easy peasy thing, but it doesn't mean that you need to do it with for like every single one of your clients. You probably can pick and choose the ones that, you know, are going to be part of this, but at least we can start gathering some data, and then with enough of that and enough people, then we can, you know, have something that actually makes sense.
Absolutely. Um, what we can do is we can come up with how we need to get that committee together. And if somebody has an interest in sitting in this space, and being in a committee for research, or if you're wanting to participate in it, obviously, you guys, this is all stuff that we do out of the goodness of our hearts. It's not like we get paid to do it, right? In that research space, but we're getting paid by our clients in those spaces. Um, so it's not like it's a loss, but the amount of documentation will be a lot. So anybody that steps into that zone is we're all probably stepping into a space where it's going to be a little extra work, but I think it's going to be better for our industry going
Mhm.
forward.
Okay.
Yeah.
Very cool.
Side note, who was on an Amazon bestseller? That's me and Giovanni.
Yeah, the book's out
The book's
finally.
out.
So
We got an email today about it. Oh, you got yours already? Yeah. There was an email that came out today from the editor, Synoptic Products, saying that like it was like one of the good ones sold, one top ones sold this weekend. I was like,
yeah.
look at that. Okay, so we wanted to go
Got it.
over probes tonight. We have all those questions about probes.
Okay. Yes, I can start there.
Okay. I know that
So
you have the question list in front of you, so I will just bounce in.
okay. So let me find it here. So actually it's this came somewhere else, but I thought it'd be because there was so many questions that it might be actually good to discuss in here. So the first one, so this was a chapter about probes, and so there's going to be kind of a lot of different questions about it. Um, okay, should or could coagulation ever happen during blend? So when we're talking about this kind of goes into it, but like the coagulation patterns on the probe, could or should coagulation ever happen when you're doing blend?
I mean, not to the same standard as thermolysis, but you have thermolysis present. So coagulation, um, it's not its driving factor when it comes to blend. It is an aid to the production of the lye that's in there. That being said, you cannot have heat present without coagulation happening to that level. It's just not as strong as straight up thermolysis. And that's you're simply, if there's no heat, there's no coagulation. So, and I will say further, you have a chemical burn that you're creating within galvanic current. So it depends on what your definition you're saying of coagulation is.
Yeah, so for me, definition of coagulation, and it's funny that you said that because I was just like, let me Google this and see what the actual
Yeah.
definition of coagulation is. And it's the action or process of a solid, especially blood, changing into action or process of a liquid, especially blood, changing to a solid or semi-solid state. That's what coagulation is. So I guess it depends. Usually I think of coagulation as, this phenomenon happening, right? So where you're kind of driving the moisture out of the tissues and you're turning the tissues inside the follicle into like a hardened mass pretty much. But I think that it happens at a certain temperature.
Yes.
So where you're below that temperature, you're not so much coagulating. I was actually trying to see if there was like another word for it when you're below a certain degree. And I think that with blend, you should not be coagulating for that reason,
Correct.
because I think about driving the moisture out and having a temperature that is, usually above 50 degrees Celsius, right? So I guess we can look up and see if there's actually an actual temperature there. But if you're doing that, then you're counterproductive to your light production.
Right.
So
And so
can
it's
you
like,
coagulate though? Yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
Turn up the intensity of the high frequency and you're definitely coagulating.
and we see that like sometimes, and that's why I'm like, can it happen? Absolutely. But your goal with blend is literally to create additional friction to get that lye to produce in an expedited manner. So your goal is not coagulation. And so it's like one of those, it's like, yes, but that's not the goal. Yes, there is such thing as too much lye. And one of the big, sorry, like there's a question from Jenny in there. Yes, there is such thing as too much lye. If you, I know back in the day, okay, we used to talk about people having the foam froth from out of the follicle. That should not be happening. And the reason it should not be happening is you have created too much of an imbalance in your levels to create one, safe practice, and two, it's like you haven't prepped the area to make it happen in less energy. And so a lot of times, and I know that Dr. Paisner had a conversation about this on the chemical side of things, where she talked about those bubbles that you're seeing usually tend to be debris being pushed up in like towards the surface. Now, I don't think it, and I'm not a chemist, right? I'm an electrologist. I don't think that it's actually that. I do think it is straight up lye bubbles. And I remember in my early days of doing multi-needle and like heavy blend on my like Claire blend, ultra blend, like that girl was solid, but she put bubbles out all the time. But I also remember those little chemical burns that you would have like just like really dry patches all along that area. And that's, you've gone too far, right? Now we've injured the epidermis.
It's like I kind of compare it to the equivalent of blowouts with thermolysis.
Right.
So it's just a little too much of a good thing, right? So desiccation, Michaela, usually happens at an even higher temperature than coagulation. So it's like that when I was talking about that range that I think of, like I feel like there's a word for below coagulation. I always say just warming up the tissues, but there must be a word for it. And then it's like you have coagulation. And I was kind of looking up the temperature ranges, and it looks like it happens as low as about 30, 35 degrees Celsius. And usually the range is somewhere between like 60 to 70 or so. So we say 50 degrees Celsius for tissues. I think it depends also on the matter of what you're coagulating. But desiccation usually happens even higher than that. And desiccation just means drying out, by the way. So I don't know that it has anything to do so much with the electricity that you're putting into it. When I was in college, I used to do desiccation studies with fruit flies. And I was there all night because I used to have that's what they do for undergrads. They give you the night shifts. And so I used to have to count desiccated fruit flies in test tubes all night.
sounds so fun.
Yeah, no electricity though, so they were just drying out. And then now to this day, I'm just like, that's kind of mean. One thing,
I
they
like
loved
that.
me because I had to pin fruit flies by their wings on like Vaseline because they would check their heart rates. And so I had to flip them on their backs and then pin their wings in Vaseline. But I was really good at it. So I would go in and I would just, and they were like, "You're so quick." I'm like, "I'm an electrologist. I'm good with little things, with the tools, no problem." I just, but it was weird stuff.
I don't think I've ever heard anybody have to do that with a fruit fly ever before.
This was a lab that studied aging. And so they're, at UCI, so they used to do aging studies and to see like what kind of mutations they could do to make the fruit flies live longer.
Wow.
So,
Michaela, when you were asking about desiccation, so electrodesiccation, or thermocoagulation or advanced electrolysis, depending on what hat you want to wear, is literally the act of removing the moisture from the imperfection that's sitting on the epidermis. So, and I think that's kind of the cool part about it is like, so desiccation would be that reduction of the moisture in there, but your goal is not to necessarily burn it as it is to dehydrate it, is another way to put it. Then it kind of just naturally falls off or dissipates together. But yeah, when you're dealing with coagulation, sometimes it's hard to answer those questions when students first start out, especially because it's like, can it happen? It's like, well, yeah, but like backpedal doesn't actually mean we want it to. So
yeah.
What's our next one?
Yes, I've got a couple questions about using non-insulated probes. And so for non-insulated probes, why do we require higher settings when the filament is surrounded by or touching the follicle? So for me, I kind of translate it to like, if you have a non-insulated probe and more surface area is in contact with the tissue, so like a deeper insertion, for example, why do you need higher settings?
Well, okay, I like to cook. Okay, so let's think about it in terms of cooking. Okay, instead of a hair. When it comes to cooking, if you were trying to warm something that you were cooking with, it might be searing a pan or like a pan that you're going to be working in. The more surface area that is exposed is the more that will then create that cook in an equal amount of time. Okay. When you have something that's insulated, okay, the energy to get to that space and to get that point effect to happen is covered. And so you're not getting the entire filament to warm together. You're pushing that energy down. It's probably the easiest and most simple way.
Compared to like, I guess in the same vein too, that you're talking about, if I had two cast iron pans, but I had a small pan and a big pan, and they were both on a burner, like same size burners, right? Let's say I'm not changing anything. And the temperature of my stove is at the exact same temperature. The bigger cast iron pan will take longer to warm up evenly than the smaller one.
Absolutely.
Because that heat has to dissipate, right? So the more surface area you have, the more the heat has to spread, the more time it's going to take. So we can compensate instead. Let's say we put the big pan on the big burner. That would be more intensity.
Right.
Keep the small pan on the small burner. And so, either way, time or intensity, we can play with both of those. But when it comes to why is it that, you have more surface area, because the electrons have more space and they spread out. And so in order for you to reach that 50 degrees Celsius, let's say, or whatever it is that you're trying to do, it's just going to take more time.
Yeah.
Or more
And
power.
one of the big things that we're facing like right now in the industry, if you're a ballet user, is that the insulated probes are out of stock for right now, for the most part. And what do you do when that space happens? Well, you pull back your energy and you work with where you know is safe first. And then you work yourself up to see what your extraction point is going to be if you've never worked with a non-insulated probe and you're working out on your own. If you're in the middle of school, you have a teacher right there that's like, hey, let's talk about this. And we work you through that. But One of the big questions I keep getting from my students, for example, because I do enjoy using ballet probes. Now we have multiple styles in the school because I believe that it's your preference, not my preference, that gets you better results in your classroom or not your classroom, your treatment room. But if that's the case, like they're seeing me use a ballet gold. Well, I love to use ballet golds, and they'll see me do that with thermolysis, and they're like, "Oh, like it's not insulated." And it's like, yes, but if I pull myself back by 25 to 50%, based on the size of my filament, remember that surface area that we're trying to warm, we should see the equivalent amount of energy be reached and safely protect the epidermis from destruction. Now, I know, especially if you guys are newbies, how tempting it is to go for the smaller probe because you don't want to hurt people. Or you're trying, but the thing is like you have to remember that that's getting hot really quickly. So if you don't have the insulation present, and you are working as if you did, and you have a small filament, you're going to be creating blowouts left and right, and damaging a lot of skin. So it's important to, as you move into trying different types of filaments, that you start to learn how that energy corresponds to the hairs in front of you with your machine. And I know that like all of us here use different machines. Every one of our machines is going to have a different setting, okay, that you're working at, but the ratios, the math behind those settings stays relatively the same within each megahertz that you're working within. So the 13.5, you can achieve the same across the board, right? A 27 with all 27. Not that there's all, but you know what I mean. A 6.78, same deal. It's like so when people get afraid because they're like, oh my God, my machine went down, I can't get this other machine. Well, if you get an equivalent energy, it'll just be a matter of learning how that energy plays on your filament in your office, understanding what those ratios look like with that machine. And usually has to do with a decimal point being moved, because these manufacturers are like, I'm going to put it over here and I'm going to put it over there. But it usually has to do with the decimal points.
Today, we want to shine some light on some of our amazing partners who are helping shape the future of electrology education, services, distribution, and so much more. We're thrilled to have such amazing partners and supporters. Whether you're just starting out or a seasoned professional, these vendors and schools have what you need to succeed.
Hey everyone, Stephanie here with Electrolysis Unplugged. Today we are talking about the Maryland Electrolysis Education Center. Dreaming of a career in permanent hair removal? MEEC is here to turn your dream into reality. MEEC offers a 650-hour hybrid program. That means part online and part in person, designed for your busy life. And get this, it's fully approved by the Maryland Higher Education Commission and the Maryland Board of Nursing Electrology Practice Committee. Graduate with confidence knowing that you're prepped and ready to sit for your Maryland electrology licensure exams. Start your journey today by visiting mdelectrolysiseducation.com. Shoot an email over to director@mdelectrolysiseducation.com or call 240-280-8124 to learn more. That's Maryland Electrolysis Education Center, where your future in electrology begins.
Hey there, electrologists. My name is Hazel Bloom. I'm a life coach for the LGBTQIA+ community and its allies. As a trans woman, I have done the hard work and introspection to figure out who I am, what I want from life, and how to live authentically as myself. These are universal skills that I can teach you and help you gain the confidence to thrive. Also, I know that the conversations with clients on the table can get a bit intense and beyond the scope of electrology, so I'd invite you to refer them to me so they can get the support they need through a tough time instead of taking that burden on yourself. I'm also available as a resource for you if you just need some assistance figuring out how to help a client or to ask any questions. Whatever you need, I can help. My website is kiwifruitcoaching.com, or you can email me directly, hazel@kiwifruitcoaching.com.
Elevate your practice with Silhouette Tone. Known worldwide for their advanced equipment and sleek designs, from epilators to treatment tables, lasers, and more, they provide a gold standard in comfort and performance. Your clients deserve the best, and the Silhouette Tone delivers. Head over to silhouettetone.us to learn more. That's Silhouette Tone, Silhouettetone.us to learn more. Thanks for tuning in to Electrolysis Unplugged. Be sure to check out our amazing sponsors for the best in electrology tools, training, technology, and so much more. Now, back to the show.
Another question that kind of in the same vein. So why is it that you should use an insulated probe when you move inside the follicle?
So we're talking about displacement. Okay, so I'm going to just say I use displacement on non-insulated probes all the time because I do blend.
You can, yeah, of course you can, but as long as you understand what's happening and you're, so I guess let's talk about what's happening when you move inside the follicle and you have a non-insulated probe. And then we can talk about why using an insulated probe can kind of like make it a little bit easier.
It's a point of where you're creating cauterization alongside of that interior of the follicle. So if you are dealing with displacement and you are trying to move that heat into different points of the follicle, and this is also why when we talk about displacement, we're not talking about going down the follicle. We usually talk about going up because you would be cauterizing. You're creating those spaces where you feel that you'll be hitting each third of the follicle. Did you say, I'm so sorry. I feel
so we were just talking about how when you're using a non-insulated probe and, we were talking about how the energy comes out and how the more surface area, the more the power spreads over that surface area. When you're using a non-insulated probe and you set your machine because, because of like the probe that you're using and you do a certain depth of insertion, right? You're picturing, let's say we're doing thermolysis, you're picturing your little teardrop to be a perfect shape to treat the area that you're looking for. If then you take that same probe, but you do half the depth that you just did, but you don't change the setting on the machine, you don't change anything else, then what happens to the energy? Pretty much it moves all of the energy to the tip of the probe that is still inside the skin. So you're reducing your surface area and the energy comes out a lot more intense, right? So that's what it's kind of referring to. When you do a deep insertion with a non-insulated, you're increasing the surface area because you have a bigger portion of the probe that is under the skin in contact with tissues. When you use that same probe and you do half the insertion, we've reduced our surface area by half. And so it's actually going to increase how the power comes out. And so usually you have overtreatment, blowouts, all that sort of thing. And so why is it that you should be using insulated probes then if you move in the follicle? Well, that's because as long as the exposed area on the probe stays under the skin, you're never changing the surface area. So I can do a deep insertion, I can do a shallow insertion, and it's never going to change my teardrop pattern as long as that area is under the skin, right? So a non-insulated probe, it's not that you can't move, but it's just that you're playing with the surface area of your probe. And so when you're more shallow, it's going to be more intense. When you're deeper, it's going to be less intense. I mean, and this can go the opposite way. Let's say you set your machine for a shallow insertion and then you insert deep. You've just increased the surface area. You're barely going to have a blip on the radar at the tip of your probe. And so it's about understanding the surface area of the probe. And when you're moving in the follicle, what happens to that teardrop, let's say, that heating pattern as you're changing that specific variable.
Yeah. And every time I went to go say that to you, I was thinking the opposite of what I was trying to say. So I would definitely say that like when we are considering displacement when it comes to thermolysis, your displacement is more efficient and better with an insulated probe because that teardrop is the same. But if if you're doing displacement with a non-insulated probe, you need to understand that that energy is going to travel up and out, and you will see more surface damage, like just full stop. That being said, when I said like I do displacement with non-insulated probes, when I do displacement with non-insulated probes, if I'm doing thermolysis, I do change energy if I ever had to, but I normally don't do displacement with non-insulated probes with thermolysis. It doesn't make sense because I don't need to move. I had all that surface area showing. So it's moot at that point. So to me, displacement has always been a better benefit for my patients when doing blend and I'm trying to agitate that lye without it having to spill over. And if I am doing pulses or repetitions as I'm doing that energy. And that is just so that if I am moving my filament, it is to work in tune with the energies that I'm doing.
So another part of another question that was on the list too was like, when we're talking about loss of power high up in the follicle, what are we even talking about? Like, what power are we losing? Like, what is it that's happening? What are we referring to?
The energy in which you're working. I mean,
well, it's like, okay, so let's say, and this is for a non-insulated probe again. So I'm doing a deep insertion and I have a non-insulated probe. There is a point effect, right? There always is a point effect. So it goes to the point of my probe first. But what happens is that in order for me to get a certain width on my point effect, the power doesn't just go to the tip and then go straight out, right?
No.
It goes out and at the same time it climbs up. So the structures that I'm trying to destroy happen to be usually the bottom 2/3 of the follicle. If my probe is uninsulated, that the time that it takes for the bubble to stretch out, it also goes up towards the top of the follicle. Now, that power that goes up to the top of the follicle, that's the energy that we're talking about, the loss of energy, because it's energy that climbs up the probe that would be that we could benefit from keeping down in the follicle because we would need it, but it just escapes up. So that's
like
what we're talking about.
Yeah, and I see that a lot with especially with students when they're working like manual thermolysis, is that trying to balance out that timing and intensity so that we're not traveling too far up the filament and creating cauterization in that top third. This is where you kind of go back to like the, as crazy as it sounds like, as the simple basic math of like the Hankel text, is you understand that like if your time, for example, is 2 in the follicle, your energy would be like would match the ratio, the math ratio in there. So like you might be 2 seconds in there, but your energy, and I'm trying to think of silhouette tone energies right now, so I'm just trying to go with this one. So if I was at like a 4 energy for 4 seconds, as I am decreasing my energy, I'm increasing my time, but in doing so, I'm creating that that teardrop to balance out without escaping as it moves up. In the like, and this is where it kind of like stinks. Like when you work with like flash, you don't have the opportunity to react quick enough to the energies that you're doing to get that point effect. You'll need to understand your levels faster because you're moving faster in that space.
And so when we start causing blowouts, we're talking about that if you're doing thermolysis, it's that psh noise that you hear. Now, if it happens once or twice, it's not really a big deal, but you have to understand a little bit what happens in the tissues when you do cause a blowout. And so a blowout usually happens because you've boiled the tissues. So that temperature, we're trying to kind of cook stuff up just slowly and slightly. We're not trying to go up so high that we are actually causing the tissues to boil. It's the blowout is us creating steam.
Yeah, it's your tea kettle.
What happens though is that steam happens to be a pretty bad conductor of electricity. And so when you're creating this, especially if you do more than one pulse, that second pulse, that point effect won't happen at the same place where the steam was just created. And so it starts to move up the probe. So usually if you have another pulse, it actually moves up a little bit higher where it's actually able to be conducted out of the probe. And if, let's say, the intensity is too high and you have a third pulse, it's going to move up even higher. And sometimes it can blow through your insulation. Insulation is thin enough that it's not a 100% guarantee that absolutely no current is going to escape through the upper part of the probe. Actually, if you look at especially Dectro's like thermographic imaging, they've done studies where they cranked it up really high and you can actually see that the heat is going to be conducted out of the insulated portion of the probe, just like anywhere else. And you can cook the top of the skin. If you overdo it, no matter what, insulated or not, it's the current's going to find some way to get out of the probe. And if it's not going to be the tip where you're trying to put it, it's going to be somewhere else.
Yeah. Pauline just asked a question there. Do you tend to start shallow and then go deeper? No. For myself, I will always start at the bottom of the follicle and work my way up. Mainly because I know the length of my probe. One, obviously that's a less important, but cauterization, if I'm working through cauterization, I'm not going to get to my point without creating damage. So working backwards is where it's at. For myself, I know that there are technicians out there. Even years ago, when we started doing more thermolysis in my family's practice, we had a practitioner come out and she had coined a technique that she wanted to call it, like she had a certain name for it. I'm not going to like say it because I just don't want people to think that like I'm talking negatively. But it was basically about displacement and how when you are moving your filament, you'd be moving down. So you're moving down the follicle. But the problem is like if I am working at energies that are balanced out for the follicle, that I am getting cauterization to happen in that space, I'm zapping through my spaces that I'm working, and it becomes hard to reach your target. The other thing is like the inflammation that it causes in that space, it becomes like a tighter insertion if you are, especially if you're working in high volume areas. So that's for me. That's how I teach it. That's how I did. That's not how I learned it initially. It's what I came to know from going to electrology conferences and learning from other electrologists that like, hey, like think about this. And that was just my takeaway from it.
Yeah. Good. Okay, let's see.
Does anybody do opposite of that are established technicians for a long time? Just out of curiosity. And you're like, that
I
is
do, it depends on the type of hair. So I will go down only if I know that I have a very deep follicle, but that's because I think I have a tendency to be a little shallow sometimes.
Oh, okay.
So maybe I'm just kind of like fixing what I think might be a mistake. So, it's especially like deep bikinis, I'll tend to go down. We don't teach it that way at school. And the main reason for that is because one thing that you need to learn while you're in school is to find the bottom of your follicle. Once you blast a little bit in there, it tends to, jumble up the tissues inside, and then I could insert the whole entire probe. I know how deep I'm supposed to go. A student usually does not. So you just you start the other way and you make sure that you're at the right spots. But yeah, you just have to, I do down sometimes.
You do. Yeah. And like there are hairs. I mean, like it's not 100%. I have reversed that. It's just, I just found for myself that I didn't like the result I was getting from it. And so I modified to what I was learning. So see, and that's the thing is like, that's why we talk about this, because we all kind of come from a different space, and who we learn from pulls into that as well. And then who we continue to learn from over the years also levels that up. What other questions do you have?
Okay, so I have one that is about the probes, insulated material, not the material, the insulated portion versus non-insulated, and how it changes in length and size as we go into bigger probes. So it's like the more insulation the needle gets, larger, and the more non-insulated material as the probe gets larger. So why does probe get longer? It looks like there is more insulation as the needle gets larger and more non-insulated material as the probe gets larger. Does the probe also get longer? Yes. I mean, the answer to that, yes, it does. So like as you go from a size 2, let's say we use the ballets, okay? Go size 2, size 3, size 4, size 5, size 6. The probes get longer as the probes get bigger. And usually the degree of insulating material also varies with sizes. So why would that be?
I mean, quite simply, your hair size changes. Why you're changing from a 2 to a 6, you're not, okay, a 2, let's think about this peach fuzz, a 6 being a pubic hair, okay? Those are not the same style of hair. And so your filament does not need to be teeny tiny or super big in opposition of what you're going after. Same thing with the diameter, right? So you're going from a 2 being a very fine hair for vellus, for example, to a 6 for a terminal or very coarse hair. The depth of that hair is going to be different because a terminal hair is deeper than a vellus hair, right?
Also, the distance between bulge and papilla.
Yes. So your distance in that whole space changes based on the type of hair that you're growing. I mean, yes, but like going with is what I meant to say. So there's that. And then the other thing is your insulation changes because your target area changes because the area that you're working in is different. Super cool thing about like ProTech probes is they have different types of insulation for the type of probe that you're working with. So if you're a blend user, you can have an IBL and it has a variable of more exposed area and less exposed area based on how much area you're trying to hit in the follicle. On an ITH, it is smaller because you're going more thermolysis, right? And then obviously like a stainless, because you guys have stainless probes as well, like it's a non-insulated probe, you have that. Within ballet, I know like last year at my education event that we had in July, they had prototype probes there. I don't know if they're like if these are going to be something that's on the market eventually. I don't know if it was just like they were trying to like see what our thoughts were on them at the education event, but they had given a bunch of samples out and they were pretty bummed. They're just like the Protex where they had like the different exposed areas. But it comes down to what are you trying to achieve with the filament that you've selected? I sometimes will see people like try to go, they think big hair, small filament, because the big hair is taking up more space, right? And you have to remember, like, when you're selecting your probe, you have a matching game to play. You're matching the length of that probe, you're matching the width of that hair, and to what you're working with. So that's my big takeaway from that.
A big mistake that I notice the students making at school is picking like size 2 must be everybody's favorite probe in the world. But the problem is, sure, your insertion's easier because you can get in the follicle easier. But if you're dealing with bikini hair, underarm hair, beard hair, you will never reach the bottom of your follicle, even if you're bottoming out that probe. And the problem is with that is like, okay, so yeah, the current maybe can detach some of it. It's just that you're not going to be as efficient as an electrologist as you could be. So if your goal is to be, like the type of electrologist that can do clearances and, like have clients get to maintenance when they're like 9 months into a treatment plan, you're not going to do that by not using the right probe and not, thinking about how you're coagulating inside the follicle, by using just the TH, but never doing displacement because you're never treating the bulge, right? So like, there's a lot of different things. It's not that you can't use a TH, but if you're not thinking about how you're using that TH and doing displacement when it's appropriate to do that, then you're not as efficient as you could be. And there's kind of a miss there. I think that you could do better.
In regards to this insulation differences, Pauline asked, is there harm in using IBLs more than ITH as long as you can go deep enough so all of the uninsulated is inserted? I tend to gravitate toward IBL, but Hannah loves ITH. My first question thinking about this is, do you find that your levels in which, if you are working on the same person, are vastly different between the two of you? Because you also, when selecting that difference, would have a difference in energy working on the same type of hair, because your exposed area is going to be more. Now, I also love working on the IBLs, but I get to work at a lower energy because I have more exposed area. ITH, those are those annoying little peach fuzz ones up at the top of the cheekbone for me. That's my jam up there. And so when I'm selecting that, I'm selecting based on that thought as well. So as an instructor, I would say, when you first start out, it's smart to go with what is recommended in that space. But at the same time, as you get comfortable, to get to play with your energies, then you get to play further outside of what is safe, as a default, and you get to go with what is easier for you to get the extraction to happen.
Michaela put a question, looks like a state board question here. And so it says, okay, so some recent graduates have been getting this on their state board. So due to heating action of the high frequency, the blend requires, and then the options are, a quarter of the galvanic lye originally needed. B was 2 times the amount of galvanic lye. C is the same amount, and D is 1.5 times the amount. Well, to pretty much, like, I was just kind of reading over it, and I read over it a couple times. 3 of those, out of 3 of the 4 answers, were pretty much saying that you would need more galvanic or the same amount. Only 1 was saying you would need less. Now, you know what high frequency does, right? If you're using blend, the high frequency is there to enhance the effect of the lye. So therefore, you're going to need less of it to do the same thing. So just by reading this, understanding what the high frequency is there for, already you kind of, if you know a little bit about test taking, there's usually 2 questions you could just poop right away. Yep. 2 were kind of saying the same thing. There was only 1 that was a true outlier, right? But if you know that you're doing blend because you want to add high frequency, and you add high frequency at a low level because it enhances the lye, the action of the lye. And so you need less galvanic to do the same amount of destruction.
The machine will prompt you to use insulated thermolysis, or ITH, when you're in thermolysis, IBL when you're in blend. Does that mean that you can't use that in the other spaces? No, but you need to know what that energy difference is going to look like. Yeah, because it's not going to tell you it's not going to tell you what your ELs and ULs are correctly up on the top if you're not matching. Like, if you never, and I used to see this all the time with some of my zaplings back in Arizona. If you never change your filament size, you never change your filament type, what those ratios are on the machine are set like on the screen to be what you set on the machine. That does not mean that's what's the energy that's playing on your filament. Okay. That just means that, like, that, because the computer doesn't know, like, oh, you put the wrong one in here. Like, that's where you come in, right? So the answer would be, like, you could use it, but it's not going to reflect your levels appropriately on the screen.
Yeah, I mean, the whole reason why the Diapolis machine has this is because the synchro technique was developed with the ITH in mind. And the reason why is because the technique is more than just a pulse. It actually came with a movement. So you would do an insertion, find your bottom, and then as you press on the foot pedal, you would retract the probe. And so all of those super tiny micropulses that are moved, that are in that time frame that's set on the machine, the idea was that you would distribute those 70 to 100 ultra fast picopulses as you would retract the probe. And so you would have destruction happening from the bulb to the bulge. And because you're moving in the follicle, then to be safer, you would use the most insulated probe. So concentrate the energy and distribute it on different parts of the follicle. So they just kind of have that on there. Does that mean that you can't use a BL, use synchro and not move at all? Sure you can. As long as you're understanding what you're doing and you're, watching the skin and you're doing all of your safeguards that are, that should be there. I use synchro all the time. I will double pulse synchro, which you're not supposed to. That's why you can't even change it on the machine.
Mhm.
So, there's lots of things. It was just developed a certain way. And so that's how it was put on the machine. We, of course, take these things as practitioners and we make them what we will, right? So.
I know that we're like our time is almost up, but I just want to say, so like I saw Pauline that Hannah's like always using the 1s and 2s. My question then is, what type of hair is she working on when she's doing that? Because if she is working with pubic and or underarm, like anything that's terminal, she is not selecting the right tool for what she needs to do. She's selecting a tiny filament that will not get her to her target. But
Yeah, I think she's she mostly does faces. So, because I've asked her about that, because I'll notice like she burns through those 1s and 2s, and I'm always in the 3s and 4s, but I do more body work and she does more faces, and she
the
does do a
faces
lot
that
of like
she's
finer
doing, are they
stuff. So
fine or thick hair?
yeah, more fine.
Fine.
Yeah, like she said, because I have this one client that I use a 5 on, and biggest she's ever used is a 4, and she's like, no, I use like a 4 on her, but I bet you I could see her using a 3 because she does tend to go, and I'm the opposite. I tend to go sometimes like bigger maybe than I should,
Mhm.
but I'm never like I feel like it goes in without resistance, but I don't know, for some reason I'm just more comfortable because I feel like less likely to hurt them if distributing it more, and I don't know, I just tend to gravitate to as big as I can, basically.
Gotcha. Yeah, I mean, I definitely, I know that a lot of people gravitate, a lot of newbies gravitate towards those tiny probes. And I get it in the sense of like there's a lot of fear that we're facing, but it's like the smaller that probe is, the hotter that probe is. And the closer you are to the surface of the skin. So you're actually working against what your goal is by doing that.
You're not as efficient, and it's also it's just a bad habit.
Yeah.
We have to be careful working by ourselves, with nobody over your shoulder. It's easy to develop bad habits if you're not, kind of thinking stuff through. So if it's the case, tell Hannah to really just, maybe if she's going for a 1, maybe try to go for a 2. If she's going for a 2, why don't you try a 3? Just see what happens,
Yeah,
So
make you laugh.
Yeah, I'll tell her
What you
that.
just said that, yes. She goes, I think some of the old timers, that's how I read that. Use the same size probe for everyone as well. Yeah, no, I have a few of my people that I distribute for that I can't get them off of like an F3. It's like everything's an F3. Just grab an F3. I'm like,
Yeah.
stop. Can you buy another pack just so I think that you're trying to do more than it's a hard one because they think that, oh, I have all this variety, how am I going to burn through it? Well, you're going to have a lot of different hairs. I mean, you will get through those packs. And it will be before they go expired. Because that's
Maybe not the F5s, but
I mean,
then don't buy 15 boxes of F5.
Right. Buy a box of F5s.
Yeah.
When I used to
Alright.
do family's practice, that's what I did. I was like, let me just like look through what you guys are using. Stop using all the 3s. So
I had to tell the student this week that he was no longer allowed to use 2s. I said, figure something else out. Let's see.
taking away your 2 privilege.
Yeah. Like the last time I'm watching you work with a 2 on somebody's bikini line.
Oh, yeah,
So
it's a hard one.
Well, and they're so much more flimsy too, and that's part of the reason why I like the bigger ones. Is you don't bend them as easy. Like I don't know. Those ones are just like you just look at them wrong, and they're bent in half.
yeah.
Oh my gosh.
All right. So I think that's it for this week. We'll see each other next week.
Yes.
Same time, same place.
Same time, same place. Thanks, guys. If you guys have questions, just like we had these drop in here, and we can do them all focus style. So
Yeah.
you're good. Okay.
Okay. See you next week.
Thanks.
Have a good evening.
Bye,
Bye-bye.
everybody.